At 50 years old, Tobey Maguire still carries a smile the world thinks it understands. The smile of a man who once swung across skyscrapers, who defined an entire generation's idea of a hero. But the truth behind that smile? Almost no one knows it. People imagine Tobey as the quiet, private Hollywood icon who simply stepped away from the spotlight. But the real story is far heavier, far more complex, and far more heartbreaking than the world ever expected. Because behind the legendary role, behind the fame that shaped the early 2000s, behind the calm and softness of his public persona, Tobey was fighting battles he never chose, facing pressures that nearly broke him, and carrying wounds that fame only made deeper. Why did the man who once ruled global box offices suddenly disappear from Hollywood's main stage? Why did a career built on talent, heart, and discipline turn into years of silence? And what happened during those years that changed him forever? There is a truth about Tobey Maguire that the world never saw coming, a truth born from childhood struggle, industry betrayal, personal collapse, and the painful cost of being everyone's hero, except his own. And today, for the first time, we uncover it. But before we understand the tragedy at 50, we must understand the life that led him there, a life that began long before the first mask was ever worn. The real story begins now. For most of the world, Tobey Maguire exists in a perfectly sealed memory. The soft-spoken, gentle-faced actor who brought Peter Parker to life with an honesty no superhero franchise has ever matched. To millions, he isn't just an actor. He is the blueprint, the original, the hero who felt human. People remember the trembling voice, the shy smile, the quiet heartbreak behind his eyes. They remember a boy who never quite fit in, who suddenly became powerful enough to save a whole city, yet fragile enough to still feel pain. And that duality, strength wrapped in vulnerability, became the core of Tobey Maguire's public identity. To the world, Tobey was the opposite of Hollywood noise. He wasn't loud. He wasn't scandalous. He didn't chase attention, parties, or headlines. He stayed private. He stayed distant. He stayed humble. And because of that, fans built an image of him as someone gentle and pure, almost untouched by fame's darkness. Tabloids tried to paint him as mysterious, but audiences adored him precisely because he wasn't trying to be seen. Directors praised his discipline. Co-stars admired his focus. And studios trusted him with one of the biggest characters ever put on film. For years, his public image was simple. Tobey Maguire, the quiet hero. The kind of celebrity who didn't need paparazzi attention or online applause. A man who carried a kind face, an honest presence, and a gravity that made every performance feel like the truth. Even after the Spider-Man trilogy, audiences assumed life was good. They imagined him living peacefully, raising his children, choosing smaller roles because he wanted simplicity. They believed he stepped away by choice, as if he woke up one day and decided he didn't need Hollywood anymore. But that version of Tobey Maguire, the calm, stable, quietly successful man, was only one side of the story, a carefully protected image, shaped by years of silence and a deep desire to keep his private world untouched. Behind that public perception was something entirely different. A man burdened by expectations, trapped between his own gentle nature and the crushing industry that crowned him a king, only to push him aside when he needed it most. Yet the world held on to the illusion. They saw Tobey as the man who simply disappeared, as if he peacefully drifted away from fame. But disappearing isn't always a choice, and silence doesn't always mean peace. There is a reason he stopped taking big roles, a reason he faded from the center of Hollywood's spotlight, a reason the gentle, thoughtful actor the world adored slowly began to withdraw, shrink back, and protect himself from everything he once dreamed of. His public image told a comforting story, one of calm maturity and quiet retreat, but the truth was far more fragile, far more painful, and far more complicated than anyone understood. Because while the world saw a graceful exit, Tobey was living through 1,000 invisible battles, battles that fame couldn't fix, success couldn't silence, and privacy couldn't fully protect him from. To the public, Tobey Maguire is still the man who smiled softly during interviews, who avoided conflict, who kept his personal life sacred and untouched. But inside the walls of Hollywood, whispers told a different tale. Of pressure, betrayal, exhaustion, and the slow unraveling of a man who gave everything to a role that demanded more than anyone knew. And that gap, between the hero the world saw and the man he truly was, became the foundation of the tragedy that now defines him at 50. To understand how everything began to fracture, you must step away from the polished image, the heroic smiles, the nostalgic posters, and the childhood memories millions still cling to. Because the real Tobey Maguire, the boy who grew up hungry, lonely, and determined, was not built for Hollywood's cruelty. He was built for survival. He was built for endurance. He was built for a life far harsher than anything fans ever imagined. And before fame changed his world, before The Mask, before the billion-dollar franchises and global pressure, there was a child fighting to stay afloat. To understand the man, you must first understand the beginning. And that story starts long before the world ever knew his name. Behind every public face lies a private world the cameras never touch. And for Tobey Maguire, that private world was built not on fame, not on power, not on comfort, but on fear, fragility, and a lifelong battle to feel safe. People saw a quiet man, a shy smile, a soft voice, a calm presence. But what they didn't see, what Tobey never wanted the world to see, was the constant tension beneath that calmness. The way his shoulders carried years of emotional weight. The way his eyes revealed a loneliness he learned to hide long before Hollywood ever entered his life. Tobey Maguire didn't grow up learning how to handle chaos. He grew up surviving it, and that survival instinct followed him into adulthood, into fame, into every decision he made. Behind closed doors, he was sensitive in a way that felt dangerous to expose. He felt deeply. He worried constantly. He feared letting people too close, afraid they would take something from him. Trust, peace, stability, or worse. His sense of self. To fans, he appeared private. But privacy for Tobey wasn't a personality trait. It was armor. It was protection. It was the only shield he had against a world that overwhelmed him. Even in his happiest moments, he lived with a quiet, unspoken vulnerability. A fear of being misunderstood, misjudged, or emotionally cornered. He avoided conflict not because he was passive, but because confrontation felt like a childhood fear returning. He wasn't built for Hollywood's loudness, or its cruelty, or its hunger to consume every piece of a person and call it entertainment. Behind his silence lived a man who needed stability, routine, and safety. Not flashing lights, red carpets, and endless eyes watching his every move. He felt things more intensely than most people did. Disappointment hit deeper. Pressure tightened his chest. Criticism felt heavier. Success felt like a spotlight he couldn't escape from. And what people thought was shyness was actually a man trying to hold himself together in rooms filled with demands he never felt built for. Even at the height of his fame, Tobey struggled with internal storms he never spoke about. The fear of failing, the guilt of not being enough, the pressure of becoming a global symbol, the exhaustion of pretending he was fine when he wasn't. He kept relationships small. He trusted few. He withdrew often, not to be mysterious, but because the world outside drained him in ways the public never recognized. There were days he felt strong. There were days he felt fragile. But there were far more days when he felt like a man standing alone against an overwhelming tide. Tobey's hidden self was a quiet battleground. A place where childhood wounds met adult responsibilities, where insecurity clashed with expectation, where a gentle spirit struggled to survive in an industry that rewards hardness, ambition, and self-promotion. He wasn't loud enough. He wasn't aggressive enough. He wasn't ruthless enough. And deep down, he knew it. He feared it. He felt judged by it. To Hollywood, vulnerability is a weakness. To Tobey, it was simply his reality. And so he hid the deepest parts of himself behind a wall built from silence, boundaries, and emotional distance. The world never saw the battles happening behind that wall. But those battles shaped every chapter of his story, including the painful ones that would come later. Before the fame arrived, before the red suit changed his life, before the world knew his name, Tobey Maguire was a boy trying to survive. And the boy he once was never fully left him. To understand why his life at 50 carries so much quiet heartbreak, you must return to where the fragility began, to the childhood that shaped him, wounded him, and built the gentle soul the world would one day mistake for strength. That story begins in his earliest memories. Before the world ever saw him as a hero, Tobey Maguire was just a small boy trying to find stability in a life that offered him very little of it. His story didn't begin with movie sets, auditions, or dreams of fame. It began with struggle, quiet, constant, and unforgiving. Tobey was born into a world that demanded resilience from him long before he understood what the word meant. His parents were young, unprepared, and often overwhelmed. Their relationship was fragile, strained by financial hardship and emotional instability. Tobey grew up watching adults around him crumble under pressure, break under stress, and drift in and out of his life before he could fully understand why. He never had a consistent home. There were apartments, small rooms, relatives' couches, places that felt temporary even when he tried to pretend they were safe. Every time he settled, something changed. A job lost, a bill unpaid, an argument that exploded into silence. And once again, he was forced to adjust, quietly, obediently, without complaint. From an early age, Tobey learned two truths. Nothing stays and nothing is guaranteed. He wasn't the kind of child who demanded attention or caused trouble. He learned to stay small, to stay quiet, to stay out of the way, because in a world that felt unstable, blending into the background felt like the safest place to be. He didn't grow up surrounded by opportunity. He grew up surrounded by scarcity. Scarcity of money, of security, of emotional calm. He understood hunger. He understood fear. He understood what it meant to want something more, but not know if life would ever allow it. His mother believed in him deeply, more than he believed in himself. She saw potential where Tobey saw uncertainty. She pushed him toward acting not as a path to fame, but as a chance to escape the instability, a chance to build a life he was never given, a chance to rewrite a childhood that had offered him so little. For Tobey, acting wasn't a dream. It was survival. A way out, a way up, a way to finally feel like he belonged somewhere. But even as he stepped into auditions, even as he practiced lines with quiet determination, even as he tried to become someone casting directors could believe in, he carried with him the weight of his origins, the fear of failing, the fear of losing everything, the fear that he wasn't enough. He was a child trying to navigate an adult world, forced to grow up before he understood what growing up meant. He watched other kids with stable homes, secure parents, predictable routines, things he could only imagine. And with every role he auditioned for, every rejection he faced, every small victory he grabbed, he was fighting not for fame, but for stability. For a life where he didn't have to keep running, he learned discipline out of necessity. He learned humility out of survival. He learned to endure because he had no choice. And these qualities, quiet strength, emotional depth, a vulnerability he never tried to hide, would one day become the very things that made him unforgettable on screen. But back then, they were simply the tools he used to get through each day. Growing up, Tobey often felt like an outsider looking in, someone watching other people live lives he couldn't imagine having. He didn't fantasize about being famous. He fantasized about being safe. Yet within the uncertainty, within the fear, within the instability, something was forming inside him. A rare emotional truth, a softness forged from hardship, a resilience built from surviving the things no child should ever have to face. This was the foundation of Tobey Maguire. Not the red suit, not the billion-dollar franchise, not the global fame, but a childhood full of unanswered questions, unmet needs, and unspoken dreams. A childhood that shaped every expression he would one day bring to the screen. To understand the man he became, and the heartbreak he carries at 50, you must understand how deeply that little boy lived inside him. Because long before the world called him a hero, Tobey was simply a child fighting for a chance. And that chance would arrive in a way no one expected. There is always a single moment, a spark, that pushes a person from survival into destiny. For Tobey Maguire, that spark didn't come from ambition or a sudden dream of stardom. It came from necessity, and from a quiet fire inside him that had been building for years. He was still a teenager, drifting between unstable homes, uncertain futures, and the constant pressure to find a path that could keep him afloat. School never felt like a place where he belonged. The noise, the chaos, the insecurity of being judged. It reminded him too much of everything he wanted to escape. So when the chance came to pursue acting seriously, he didn't hesitate. Not because he believed he was gifted, but because he believed it was his one real shot at building a life he wouldn't have to run from. Tobey wasn't the loud kid in auditions. He didn't walk into rooms with confidence or charisma. He walked in quietly, almost invisible, until the moment he spoke. And when he did, something shifted. Casting directors leaned forward. Directors paused. Rooms went still. He didn't perform emotions. He felt them. He didn't pretend to be vulnerable. He was vulnerable. Every line, every moment, every expression carried something raw. Something born from real struggle, real fear, real longing. People couldn't explain it, but they could feel it. He had a quality you can't teach, can't force, can't fake. A sincerity that came from having lived a life that demanded honesty. And so, slowly, quietly, the small roles began to come. Commercials, bit parts, short scenes in television shows, moments where he'd appear for only a few lines, yet leave an impression directors couldn't forget. But the real spark happened the day he was cast in a small indie project, surrounded by seasoned actors who immediately noticed something unusual about the quiet kid with the restless eyes. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to connect. He wasn't performing for applause. He was performing because it was the only place he felt understood. Acting gave him something life never had: control. For the first time, he could step into a world that made sense. A world where emotions had meaning. A world where vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was the story. People began whispering, "That kid is different. There's something about him. He's going to go far." Tobey didn't hear those whispers. He didn't see himself the way others did. To him, every role felt like a fragile chance. Every audition felt like a test he wasn't sure he could pass. But then came the opportunity that would ignite everything. A role in the Cider House Rules, where Tobey's quiet strength became impossible to ignore. It wasn't loud, flashy acting. It was subtle, human, painfully honest. The kind of performance that stays with you long after the scene ends. Hollywood noticed. Directors sought him out. Studios began saying his name, and fans, those who saw him for the first time, felt the same thing casting directors had felt years earlier. There was something unmistakably real about him. But the true spark, the moment that transformed Tobey Maguire from a rising talent into a global icon, was still ahead. A role was waiting for him. A role no one could have predicted he would define for an entire generation. A role that fit him not because he was strong or powerful, but because he carried the same fragile humanity the character was built on. Tobey didn't know it yet, but fate was leading him toward a red suit, a mask, and a responsibility he never asked for, one that would lift him higher than he ever imagined, and later cost him more than anyone will ever truly understand. The spark had been lit, but the fire of his breakthrough was about to change everything. And that moment was Spider-Man. Success is a strange thing. It can lift a person higher than they ever imagined, and at the same time trap them in a cage made of gold. At the height of his career, Tobey Maguire wore the crown of Hollywood's most beloved hero. Children idolized him. Studios depended on him. The industry praised him. And global audiences saw him as something more than an actor. They saw him as a symbol. Spider-Man wasn't just a movie character anymore. He became a cultural language, a global identity, a generation-defining figure. And Tobey Maguire was the face behind it all. This was the peak, the absolute summit of everything he had fought for. But the crown he wore came with a weight that grew heavier by the year. With every sequel, expectations multiplied. With every interview, pressure tightened. With every appearance, a part of Tobey felt like it was slipping away. He was no longer the quiet, unseen boy from a fragile childhood. He was the world's hero, expected to be confident, to be strong, to be present, even when he felt none of those things inside. People saw the red suit. They saw the success. They saw the box office numbers. But they didn't see what it cost him to maintain that image. Tobey was a deeply sensitive person living in an industry that rewards loudness, charisma, and control. He wasn't built for constant attention. He wasn't built for aggressive Hollywood politics. He wasn't built for a lifestyle where every breath, every step, every expression was analyzed. Behind the scenes, the crown tightened. Producers pushed him harder. Studios expected perfection. Directors demanded emotional depth while ignoring the toll it took on him. He was expected to be a hero on screen and off it, handling fame with grace, handling pressure without complaint, handling the demands of a billion-dollar franchise like it was effortless. But it wasn't effortless. It was exhausting, overwhelming, crushing. The people around him began noticing the shift. Tobey withdrew more. He grew quieter, more guarded, more cautious with who he trusted. He felt eyes on him at all times, watching, judging, expecting. And for a man who once relied on privacy to feel safe, fame became an emotional battlefield he couldn't escape. Even friendships grew complicated. Some were real, some weren't. Some people wanted Tobey, some wanted Spider-Man, and he could never fully tell the difference. He began navigating success the same way he once navigated childhood. Carefully, quietly, hoping not to break anything important. But Hollywood does not allow gentle navigation. It demands boldness. It demands sacrifice. It demands more than a sensitive soul can give without consequence. And as the years passed, Tobey found himself trapped between two worlds. The world where he was loved, and the world where he felt lost. He had the crown. He had the fame. He had the legacy, but the higher he rose, the more distant he became from the version of himself he once recognized. The world believed they were watching a celebrated star at the peak of his journey. But they were also watching a man slowly crumble under the pressure of being everyone's hero, with no space left to be human. Because the crown of Spider-Man wasn't just heavy, it was suffocating. And behind the smiling posters, behind the roaring crowds, behind the massive success, Tobey was beginning to collapse under the very role that made him a legend. The world saw the crown, but they didn't see the cost, and that cost was about to reshape the rest of his life. Every rise has a cost. And for Tobey Maguire, the cost of becoming a global icon was far heavier than anyone ever imagined. The pressure didn't break him all at once. It chipped away slowly, quietly, piece by piece. The world expected a superhero, but superheroes don't feel exhaustion. They don't feel fear. They don't question whether they are enough. They don't lie awake wondering if they've lost themselves. Tobey did. Every day. Behind the interviews and premieres, behind the global applause, behind the red suit that millions adored, there was a man running out of emotional air. As the franchise grew, studio tensions grew with it. Schedules became brutal. Demands increased. Decisions were made above him, around him, without him. People who barely knew him began shaping his future because his face was now a corporate investment. And for someone who valued privacy and gentle stability, the machinery of Hollywood began to feel like a trap. The cameras didn't just follow him. They consumed him. Every expression became a headline. Every moment in public was captured, edited, speculated, exaggerated. Tobey was never comfortable with attention. So being watched by millions felt like living inside a glass box with no place to hide. Friends noticed him retreating into himself. He became quieter, more distant, harder to reach. The weight wasn't just professional. It was emotional. He began carrying guilt. Guilt for feeling overwhelmed by success. Guilt for wanting peace when the world wanted more from him. Guilt for not being the perfect hero fans imagined. The gentle boy who once tried to survive a chaotic childhood was now the man trying to survive the chaos of worldwide fame. But the real fracture, the price that cut deepest, was the loss of identity. Somewhere between the first film and the last, Tobey's sense of self began fading. People didn't see him anymore. They saw Spider-Man. They expected Spider-Man. They wanted Spider-Man. He could no longer tell who knew him, and who only wanted to stand next to the mask he wore on screen. And then came the pressure of trying to protect his own future. The industry surrounded him with deals, negotiations, contracts, each one more demanding and more complicated than the last. He was expected to be confident, assertive, strategic. But Tobey wasn't built for Hollywood's aggressive chessboard. Behind the scenes, he faced moments of tension with directors, producers, and studio executives who wanted a louder, more compliant version of him. People misread his softness as stubbornness. They misread his boundaries as attitude. They misread his discomfort as ego. The world didn't see a man overwhelmed. They saw headlines. They saw rumors. They saw narratives crafted for clicks, not truth. And Tobey, emotionally reserved and deeply private, had no defense against forces that twisted his silence into stories he never got the chance to correct. But the most painful price of all was the internal one. He lost joy. He lost calm. He lost the sense of safety he spent his entire childhood searching for. Acting had once been his escape. Now it felt like another cage. And as the years passed, Tobey began to feel something he never wanted to admit. The role that gave him everything was now taking everything from him. His confidence, his peace, his emotional balance, his sense of worth outside the character. He wasn't just tired. He was depleted, hollowed out, fractured from trying to be a superhero for the world, while struggling to just be a human for himself. The price of the crown was no longer abstract. It was real. It was painful. And it was reaching a point where something had to break. Because no one, not even the most beloved hero of a generation, can carry that much weight forever. The world was cheering for Spider-Man. But Tobey Maguire, the man behind the mask, was quietly nearing a breaking point. And soon, the fall would come. Fame has a peculiar way of exposing the fragile parts of a person no one expects. For Tobey Maguire, the pinnacle of success, the Spider-Man trilogy, the global admiration, the millions of fans, was not just a reward. It was also the beginning of a personal unraveling he never anticipated. The world saw the superhero, the quiet yet charismatic actor who carried $1 billion franchise on his shoulders. They saw a man who seemed reserved, humble, almost unaffected by the fame that often destroys others. But what no one realized was that the very qualities that made him perfect for Peter Parker, sensitivity, emotional depth, humility, were the qualities that made the pressures of fame almost unbearable. The first cracks appeared subtly. Tobey's private life began shrinking, not by choice, but by necessity. He withdrew from the social scenes, declined interviews, and became more selective with the projects he accepted. Even the sequels, the massive budgets, and the lucrative deals brought an unexpected toll. Behind the quiet demeanor, an internal storm was raging. Self-doubt, exhaustion, and the gnawing pressure to live up to an impossible standard. Hollywood is unforgiving. It rewards compliance, assertiveness, and bravado. Tobey had neither in abundance. He was soft-spoken, introspective, and profoundly private. Where other stars used charm or visibility to navigate the industry, Tobey relied on skill, subtlety, and quiet persistence. But subtlety is often invisible in a world built for spectacle. His hesitations, his moments of vulnerability, were sometimes misinterpreted as weakness or disengagement. Directors and producers, chasing efficiency and deadlines, didn't understand the emotional labor required for his performance. At home, the strain was equally taxing. Tobey had always valued privacy, stability, and personal connections over public validation. But fame demanded a price he wasn't prepared to pay. The attention, constant scrutiny, and the weight of expectation began eroding the calm, steady foundation he had built for himself. Friends noticed the distance. Family noticed the quiet frustration. Tobey was still present, still the loving father and husband, but increasingly unreachable in the ways that mattered most. The fall was not sudden. It didn't happen in one catastrophic moment. It was a gradual descent, like ice melting under pressure. Projects that once excited him became obligations. He no longer experienced the thrill of performing or the joy of connecting with characters. Instead, each audition, each role, each press event felt like a test he wasn't sure he could pass. The man who had once walked into casting rooms with quiet authority now felt fragile, exposed, and perpetually on edge. Critics began to notice subtle shifts in his performances. The spark that had defined Peter Parker, the vulnerability, the relatability, was now tinged with a weariness audiences could sense even if they didn't fully understand it. Rumors started circulating. Tobey was difficult to work with. He was emotionally distant. He was burned out. None of it captured the truth. Tobey was not difficult, he was exhausted. Not aloof, he was overwhelmed. Not broken, he was quietly struggling to reconcile the world's expectations with his own. Humanity, financial pressures, industry politics, and personal expectations compounded the problem. Offers came, but they often required compromises he couldn't or wouldn't make. Studio executives pushed for blockbuster formulas, for commercial appeal, for star power that fit their marketing models. Tobey, however, had always chosen roles that resonated emotionally, that allowed him to explore depth and complexity. The collision between his artistic integrity and the commercial machinery of Hollywood created tension, both internal and external. The fall also affected his public persona. Fans adored Spider-Man, but Tobey the Man was slipping from view. Media narratives spun stories that rarely matched reality. He was portrayed as reclusive, mysterious, or enigmatic, when in truth he was quietly grappling with the very human challenges of pressure, expectation, and personal identity. Social events, award shows, and interviews became exercises in endurance rather than celebration. Tobey navigated them with grace, but beneath the composed exterior, he felt himself fracturing. Personal relationships bore the brunt of the strain. Tobey's marriage, friendships, and familial bonds were tested as he retreated into himself. He remained loving and attentive, but the constant scrutiny, professional obligations, and emotional exhaustion created distance. Loved ones witnessed moments of frustration, self-doubt, and occasional despair. They learned to adapt, to approach him with patience, empathy, and careful guidance. Every conversation became measured. Every interaction required emotional energy that Tobey, at times, struggled to summon. At the same time, the industry's obsession with Spider-Man intensified. Tobey had become inseparable from the character. Fans demanded more sequels, more appearances, more interviews. Studios demanded continuity, brand recognition, and reliability. Tobey, who had once embraced the role with sincerity and depth, now felt trapped. The suit that had brought him global recognition also felt like a cage. He was Spider-Man in the eyes of the world. Yet Tobey Maguire, the man, the artist, the father, the husband, was slowly receding behind the mask. Isolation followed naturally. The more he withdrew, the more people speculated. Hollywood often mistakes distance for disdain, privacy for arrogance. Tobey's quietness was misread. His need for space was labeled disinterest. His exhaustion was interpreted as weakness, and the misunderstanding compounded the weight he already carried. Financial security, fame, and accolades did not mitigate the emotional toll. Tobey found himself questioning not only his career choices, but also his own value, his own identity. The hero he portrayed on screen was unwavering, courageous, resilient. But in reality, Tobey felt fragile, vulnerable, and uncertain. The disconnect between expectation and reality became a constant, silent burden. The fall reached its most acute point during the planning of Spider-Man 3. Expectations were higher than ever. Audiences anticipated perfection. Studios demanded flawless execution. Tobey was expected to be the anchor for a sprawling narrative, to carry not only his character, but the weight of a franchise. And yet, he struggled. Not with skill, he still had the talent, but with the emotional and psychological fatigue that fame had imposed. On set, he began experiencing moments of self-doubt. Lines he had delivered effortlessly in the past required multiple takes. Emotional scenes demanded more energy than he could summon. The camera captured a man still remarkable in talent, but humanly vulnerable in ways that audiences could not see, and few colleagues fully understood. Critics and fans alike were quick to judge. Some praised his dedication, others criticized perceived lapses. Tobey absorbed it silently, internalizing the pressure rather than reacting publicly. The fall was private, almost invisible, but it was no less real. It was a collapse of spirit rather than skill, a quiet struggle against the relentless demands of Hollywood and the expectations of a world that had once adored him. Even outside work, Tobey felt the consequences. Social interactions became taxing. Public appearances, which once felt like opportunities, now drained him emotionally. He retreated into solitude not from arrogance, but from necessity. The man who had once thrived on subtlety, introspection, and emotional truth found that the world demanded extroversion, performance, and continuous visibility. This tension shaped his choices. Tobey began accepting fewer projects. He became selective in public exposure. He chose roles based on emotional resonance rather than commercial potential. This was misunderstood by some, who thought he was fading from relevance. But in truth, Tobey was protecting himself, his mental health, his emotional stability, and his remaining energy to invest in what mattered most: family, authenticity, and meaningful art. The fall was marked by contradiction. Tobey had achieved global fame, wealth, and critical recognition, yet he felt increasingly fragile. He had everything the world told him he should want, yet he felt constrained, exposed, and isolated. The very qualities that made him an extraordinary actor, his sensitivity, his emotional depth, his quiet authenticity, made him vulnerable to the pressures of fame. By the end of the Spider-Man trilogy, the fall was undeniable. Tobey had reached a professional peak, yet personally, he felt depleted. The character that had brought him acclaim also demanded more than he could easily give. He began exploring ways to regain control over his life, to reclaim private spaces, to nurture family and personal identity. The fall had exposed the limitations of human endurance against relentless expectation. In the end, the fall was not a sudden collapse, but a quiet, ongoing struggle. A man balancing the weight of heroism with the fragility of humanity. A public figure navigating a private battle. A beloved actor learning that even the most extraordinary success cannot shield one from internal turmoil. Tobey Maguire had reached the summit of fame, and yet the climb had left deep scars. The Spider-Man suit remained iconic, the performances unforgettable, but the man beneath it faced the consequences of a life lived in the glare of global attention. The fall was inevitable, not because of failure, but because of the relentless human cost of living up to perfection, both the world's and his own. And in this fall, Tobey discovered something essential. Survival, authenticity, and resilience are not measured by box office numbers, awards, or applause, but by the ability to face personal struggles quietly, with dignity, and with the people you love closest by your side. After the fall comes the silence. It is not sudden. It is not violent. It is subtle, insidious, and relentless. For Tobey Maguire, the silence arrived as the world's attention slowly receded, leaving him in a space few could understand, fewer still could enter. The Spider-Man suit, the accolades, the millions of eyes, these were gone. What remained was quiet, an emptiness, both terrifying and necessary. Tobey had spent decades inhabiting the gaze of the world. From his early days as the earnest boy next door in independent films to the iconic hero who swung through New York's skyline, he had always performed for someone else. The world watched, the cameras followed, the applause dictated rhythm, and for a long time, Tobey Maguire had thrived within that structure. It gave him purpose. It gave him identity. But the silence that followed the fall had no script, no direction, no reward. Suddenly, there were no cues, no lights, no audience. Tobey was left with only himself. And the first realization in that silence is always the same. Who am I when no one is watching? At first, the silence was disorienting. Tobey attempted to fill it with work, with appearances, with the faint echoes of the roles that had once defined him. But even the familiar could not mask the absence of external expectation. There was no applause to chase, no premiere to attend, no box office to validate effort. The world had stopped asking, and Tobey's inner dialogue grew louder. He began confronting questions that fame had long buried. Who am I beyond Spider-Man? Beyond Hollywood? beyond the persona everyone assumes is unshakable? What remains when the mask is removed, when the bright lights dim, when the expectations vanish? In the silence, Tobey found space, but not immediately comfort. The quiet forced him to reflect on a life previously lived on autopilot, navigating scripts, scenes, interviews, and public appearances. Now, without those anchors, he had only his own mind, thoughts unfiltered and unmediated by the external noise. It was terrifying. For someone who had been conditioned to react, perform, and project, introspection became a confrontation. Days became routines of isolation and quiet observation. Tobey's mornings were unstructured, his movements deliberate. He wandered his home, sometimes lingering on old photographs, revisiting memories both triumphant and painful. Films he had starred in, Spider-Man, Seabiscuit, The Great Gatsby, no longer defined him externally. They existed as fragments of a past self, a younger self. The silence was compounded by public misinterpretation. Fans speculated about his absence from screens. Media stories suggested he was reclusive, eccentric, or disengaged. Social narratives framed the retreat as intentional, when in truth, Tobey was navigating the complex emotional aftermath of years spent living for external validation. Privacy was no longer indulgence, it was survival. Inside the home, silence carried a different weight. It was not only the absence of work or fame, but the space for reflection, healing, and confronting unresolved internal conflicts. Tobey had never fully reconciled with the intense pressure of adolescence, the early exposure to the entertainment industry, the constant oscillation between public scrutiny and private identity. The silence allowed those shadows to surface. In these moments, Tobey faced the emotional cost of his own sensitivity. He realized the depth to which he had sacrificed for success, not money, not fame, but emotional stability, personal peace, and sometimes even authentic connection. He recognized the subtle erosion of joy that had crept into his life, unnoticed amidst awards, premieres, and box office triumphs. The silence also revealed patterns of avoidance. Tobey had spent much of his career deflecting personal pain through work. Acting was not only craft, it was refuge. Scenes became therapy, roles became escapes, schedules became shields. But without the constant activity, there was nowhere to hide. And in that absence, loneliness arrived. Not the loneliness of isolation, but of profound self-encounter. He began journaling, attempting to capture thoughts that had no audience. He read, not for research, not for preparation, but for contemplation. He revisited old scripts, not to act, but to understand himself at the time he wrote, rehearsed, or performed them. Even exercise, previously a routine for discipline and physical presence, became meditation, a way to feel his body when his mind seemed to falter under the quiet weight. Family became both anchor and mirror. Tobey leaned on his loved ones for grounding, but also observed himself reflected in their care. Conversations became slower, measured, thoughtful. Humor returned occasionally, small sparks amid prolonged quiet. But even with love surrounding him, Tobey felt the unique isolation of a man who had spent decades performing roles for others, now seeking meaning solely within himself. The silence reshaped his relationships outside family as well. Former collaborators, friends, and peers adjusted expectations. Some withdrew, assuming he was unreachable. Others approached cautiously, respecting the boundaries he had silently erected. Social circles became smaller, interactions more deliberate, and Tobey learned to communicate through observation, presence, and selective engagement. It was within this silence that he began the painstaking work of self-reconstruction. Without scripts dictating his movements, he explored interests previously neglected. He revisited painting, music, and hobbies that had been sidelined during the relentless pursuit of professional success. He re-engaged with personal passions, not for validation, but for self-affirmation. Every new or rekindled interest became a bridge toward understanding who Tobey was outside the Spider-Man mythos. Yet silence is also confrontational. Tobey faced the weight of regret. Roles declined too early, projects pursued for external gain, friendships strained by absence, moments missed due to the relentless demands of a career built around expectation rather than personal desire. Each memory carried an emotional resonance that was at once painful and clarifying. He began forgiving himself, acknowledging that choices had been necessary, even when they came at personal cost. He learned patience in ways only isolation can teach. Tobey had once measured life in milestones, movies released, awards won, recognition achieved. In silence, he measured life in moments. A quiet breakfast with his family, a conversation without distraction, a day spent entirely for himself. These small victories became monumental, redefining the meaning of success beyond applause and attention. Still, the silence was not uniform. There were moments of doubt, anxiety, and fear. The absence of constant external validation left him vulnerable to introspective spirals. Tobey questioned his relevance, his creativity, and his identity. The world, now distant, seemed to have moved on without him. And yet, it was in navigating this uncertainty that he discovered resilience. He realized that silence does not equate to emptiness. It can be a canvas, a space for self-definition, and a laboratory for understanding human emotion and motivation. Tobey began creating boundaries intentionally, choosing when and how to engage with others, when to speak, when to listen, when to withdraw. Every decision was an act of agency, a reclaiming of autonomy that fame had once diluted. The media rarely captured this evolution. Headlines demanded drama, speculation, and spectacle. Social narratives framed absence as disinterest. But Tobey's silence was neither passive nor accidental. It was deliberate. It was protective. It was reconstructive. It was the quiet work of a man learning to survive not as a public icon, but as a human being, fully present for himself and his loved ones. In the quiet, Tobey rediscovered empathy, not for audiences, not for critics, but for himself. He acknowledged vulnerability as strength, introspection as necessity, and reflection as a tool for navigating a life previously dictated by external expectation. He recognized the courage in stepping back, in letting go, in embracing stillness as a form of action. The silence also revealed beauty. Tobey began to appreciate the subtleties of life previously drowned out by cameras, scripts, and deadlines. The sound of rain, the patterns of sunlight, the laughter of children, the cadence of conversation. These became anchors, reminders that existence itself holds meaning independent of fame or fortune. Over time, the silence transformed from a place of uncertainty into a sanctuary. Tobey learned to navigate the interior landscape of his mind with patience and care. He discovered rhythm in reflection, solace in solitude, and clarity in absence. Every day became a negotiation between presence and introspection, between the echoes of past acclaim and the quiet realization that life's significance extends beyond recognition. By embracing silence, Tobey redefined what it means to survive the fall. He did not emerge immediately stronger or transformed. There was no instant resolution, no sudden revelation. Instead, he developed resilience, the slow, steady capacity to endure, reflect, and reconnect with his inner self. The silence, once intimidating and suffocating, became a teacher, guiding him toward wisdom, balance, and self-awareness. In the end, the silence was not merely an absence of noise. It was a crucible, forging a man capable of surviving both the adulation and the pressures that fame imposed. It was in this silence that Tobey Maguire reclaimed agency, nurtured his family relationships, confronted his vulnerabilities, and laid the foundation for the next chapter of his life. A chapter defined not by Spider-Man, not by Hollywood, but by authenticity, self-respect, and quiet strength. And in that silence, Tobey discovered something profound: that survival is not measured by applause, awards, or attention, but by the courage to face oneself, unguarded, and to continue moving forward, even when the world is no longer watching. The silence had been long, the fall had been heavy, and yet life has a way of drawing even the most withdrawn souls back into motion. For Tobey Maguire, the return was neither sudden nor dramatic. It did not arrive with flashing lights or roaring applause. Instead, it began quietly, imperceptibly, with small choices, deliberate actions, and the subtle courage required to reclaim a life nearly lost to doubt, exhaustion, and isolation. It started in the simplest ways. Tobey allowed himself to re-engage with the craft he loved. Not for fame, not for approval, but because acting had always been his language for understanding the world. He revisited scripts with care, selected roles that resonated with his renewed sense of purpose, and approached each project with a patience that had been honed during the long years of retreat. No longer rushed by expectation, no longer driven solely by public perception, Tobey rediscovered the joy in performance, the thrill in storytelling, and the intimacy of character creation. The return was also deeply personal. Family, which had anchored him through the fall and the silence, remained at the center of his renewed life. Tobey's interactions with his children became more deliberate, more present, more mindful. Every shared meal, every quiet conversation, every moment of laughter became a testament to resilience. In the absence of constant public attention, Tobey could invest fully in relationships that mattered, nurturing bonds that had been strained by the relentless pressures of career and fame. In the professional realm, the return was subtle but powerful. Tobey was no longer compelled to chase opportunities dictated by others. Instead, he curated his career with intention. He chose projects that challenged him emotionally, that allowed him to explore facets of humanity often ignored in blockbuster cinema. Directors and co-stars, many of whom had witnessed his earlier struggles, greeted his re-emergence with cautious respect, appreciating not only his talent, but the depth of insight he now brought to every scene. The world, meanwhile, began to notice. Audiences who had admired Tobey for years sensed a transformation, an authenticity that extended beyond the characters he portrayed. Interviews, appearances, and select public engagements reflected a man more grounded, more introspective, and more present than ever before. Tobey had not returned with fanfare or spectacle. He returned with subtle authority, commanding attention through quiet confidence rather than overt performance. Yet the return was not without tension. Tobey carried with him the scars of the fall, the memory of exhaustion, the understanding of vulnerability. Each decision, each step forward, was measured against a past marked by intense scrutiny, self-doubt, and isolation. The path back into public life required courage, the courage to risk exposure, to risk judgment, and to risk repeating mistakes that could undo the fragile equilibrium he had cultivated. During years of silence, Tobey's approach to this challenge was deliberate. He leaned on introspection, reflection, and careful planning. He sought roles that aligned with his inner compass rather than external expectation. He engaged selectively with the media, speaking only when he felt prepared, and allowing his work to communicate more eloquently than words ever could. Slowly, deliberately, Tobey rebuilt a bridge between the man he had become in silence and the man the world remembered. The return also encompassed reinvention. Tobey began exploring creative avenues beyond acting, producing projects that resonated with personal values, investing in stories that illuminated underrepresented voices, and using his influence not for self-promotion, but for meaningful impact. He discovered that return is not merely a return to what was lost, but an evolution into a new self, one shaped by struggle, tempered by reflection, and guided by authenticity. Fans, too, played a role in this chapter. Social media, once overwhelming and invasive, became a platform for genuine connection. Tobey shared glimpses of his journey, moments of humor, humility, and humanity that reminded audiences he was not just an icon, but a living, breathing person navigating the complexities of life. Their response was a quiet encouragement, a reminder that support exists not in spectacle, but in shared understanding and empathy. Within the industry, colleagues began to notice changes in his demeanor and approach. Tobey's quiet resilience, once mistaken for reserve, now appeared as profound strength. Directors who had once hesitated at the weight of his Sensitivity now admired at his depth. Co-stars who had seen his struggles recognized his return, not as a fleeting comeback, but as a lasting evolution. Tobey had learned to navigate fame on his own terms, balancing public engagement with private stability. The personal victories of his return were equally significant. Tobey rebuilt routines that honored both work and life, integrating mindfulness, family time, and creative exploration. He discovered that true return is not measured in box office success or critical acclaim, but in the equilibrium between personal fulfillment and professional expression. Each day was a negotiation between ambition and peace, expectation and authenticity. And in mastering that balance, Tobey reclaimed not only his career but his sense of self. The Spider-Man legacy, once a source of immense pressure, became a tool rather than a burden. Tobey approached the character not as a commodity to be exploited, but as a vessel for storytelling that could resonate with audiences on a human level. He embraced the responsibility of the role with humility, understanding that his portrayal had shaped generations of fans and inspired countless lives. In doing so, he transformed what had once felt like a cage into a platform for meaningful expression. Public perception shifted gradually. The world recognized the quiet resilience that had carried him through hardship, celebrated the deliberate choices that marked his renewed career, and appreciated the humility that had emerged from years of struggle. Tobey's return was not explosive. It was nuanced, introspective, and profoundly human. It demonstrated that true strength lies not in never falling, but in the ability to rise deliberately, thoughtfully, and with integrity. Even creative collaborations reflected his evolution. Tobey approached co-workers with empathy, listening with patience, engaging with sincerity, and offering guidance drawn from personal experience. The man who had once been misjudged for his sensitivity now wielded it as power, quiet, subtle, and transformative. Every set, every scene, every interaction became an opportunity not merely to perform, but to connect, mentor, and influence positively. The return also reshaped his internal narrative. Tobey no longer measured success purely by external validation. He evaluated decisions through the lens of personal growth, emotional integrity, and meaningful impact. Achievements became secondary to authenticity. Recognition became secondary to fulfillment. And in this recalibration, Tobey discovered a sense of freedom previously denied by fame, expectation, and relentless scrutiny. Family remained the cornerstone of his return. He was present in ways that mattered most, attuned to their needs, emotionally available, and fully engaged. The lessons learned during years of silence, patience, empathy, self-reflection, enhanced his capacity as a husband, father, and friend. In rebuilding these bonds, Tobey reaffirmed that the foundation of any true return lies in human connection, love, and presence. Ultimately, Tobey Maguire's return was an evolution of self rather than a return to former glory. It was the culmination of reflection, resilience, and intentional action. He emerged not as the man defined solely by Spider-Man, by fame, or by public perception, but as a multidimensional individual who had endured hardship, learned from it, and chosen to engage with life fully and deliberately. The journey from silence to return illustrates a truth often ignored by the world: that recovery, resurgence, and renewal are not defined by spectacle, but by internal reconciliation. Tobey's narrative demonstrates that true artistry and true humanity reside not in applause, but in quiet courage, resilience, and the deliberate reclamation of one's life. Through this return, Tobey Maguire offers a blueprint for surviving both the fall and the silence. Embrace struggle, cultivate reflection, nurture authentic relationships, and pursue purposeful action. In doing so, he demonstrates that the most profound victories are often invisible to the world, occurring within, quietly, deliberately, and with unwavering integrity. And as the world watches, slowly noticing his presence again, it becomes clear that Tobey Maguire has not merely returned. He has transformed. He has reclaimed his life on his terms. And in that reclamation, he has found the freedom, authenticity, and resilience that the fall and the silence had once threatened to steal. The return is not a destination. It is a process, a deliberate, conscious choice to live fully, authentically, and with the courage to face both the world and oneself. Tobey Maguire's return, long awaited and quietly profound, marks not an ending, but a beginning. The reawakening of a man who has learned to survive, to reflect, and ultimately to thrive. That capacity to connect across cultures, languages, and generations cements his status not just as a star, but as a symbol of empathy, courage, and perseverance. Critically, Tobey's legacy also lies in the lessons learned through adversity. His professional hiatus, his retreat from the public eye, and his eventual return illustrate the power of self-awareness and intentional living. He demonstrated that success is not defined by constant visibility, but by alignment with one's values, the courage to prioritize mental and emotional health, and the willingness to rebuild when life falters. These lessons resonate beyond cinema. They offer a roadmap for living authentically. In any sphere of life, silence, once feared, now becomes a part of that legacy. Tobey's ability to endure solitude, to reflect deeply, and to emerge with renewed purpose exemplifies the quiet strength of character. In a world obsessed with spectacle, his story underscores that true courage is often private, measured in moments of introspection and deliberate choice rather than public triumph. That is a lesson generations of fans and aspiring actors can carry forward. Moreover, Tobey's legacy is inseparable from his humility. Despite global fame, he remained grounded, approachable, and empathetic. He resisted the trappings of ego, avoided unnecessary spectacle, and consistently allowed the work to speak for itself. In doing so, he challenged Hollywood's norms, showing that influence and success need not compromise humanity. That example is invaluable to those seeking meaning beyond recognition. His influence on cinema persists. Actors, directors, and writers cite Tobey as a model for emotional truth in performance. The authenticity he brought to his roles set new standards for what blockbuster acting could achieve. He proved that audiences crave relatability, subtlety, and vulnerability, even within action-packed high-budget spectacles. In this way, Tobey Maguire's legacy extends beyond a single character. Beyond Spider-Man, it reshapes expectations of art, empathy, and storytelling in popular culture. Tobey's return, following the silence and the fall, also contributes profoundly to his legacy. It is the story of resilience, a man reclaiming life on his own terms, embracing imperfection, and choosing growth over pretense. His journey from struggle to self-reclamation resonates with anyone who has faced adversity, offering a living testament to the power of reflection, patience, and deliberate action. Public perception, while important, has never defined him. Tobey's legacy is built in the spaces unseen by the world. The quiet moments of parenting, the intimate conversations with friends, the internal battles against doubt, the measured decisions that preserved integrity. These are the details that endure, even when fame fades, even when headlines disappear. This is the enduring mark of a life lived fully, consciously, and with courage. As Tobey continues to engage selectively with the public, to pursue projects aligned with his vision, and to nurture the relationships that sustain him, his legacy grows in depth rather than breadth. He demonstrates that influence is not necessarily in omnipresence, but in intentionality, the choice to shape the world, not through constant visibility, but through meaningful action, thoughtful creativity, and authenticity. In retrospect, his career appears almost prophetic. The sensitive actor navigating adolescence, the breakthrough with Spider-Man, the fall, the silence, the return, all chapters forming a complete narrative arc of human experience. Fans, colleagues, and future generations of actors will study this trajectory, not simply for entertainment, but as a guide to surviving, evolving, and thriving in the pressures of life and fame. Even beyond cinema, Tobey's story offers cultural resonance. He embodies the reality that success and struggle are intertwined, that vulnerability is not weakness, and that true achievement is measured in authenticity, resilience, and the quiet courage to continue forward in the face of adversity. This duality, public achievement paired with private perseverance, is central to his legacy, making it both universal and deeply personal. Ultimately, Tobey Maguire's legacy is about survival, presence, and the deliberate choice to live a life aligned with values, rather than external expectation. It is a testament to the enduring power of introspection, the human capacity for resilience, and the quiet dignity that comes from navigating life fully, with honesty and courage. He leaves a blueprint for those who follow, showing that a life well lived is not always measured in applause, but in integrity, empathy, and the ability to rise, reflect, and return stronger. And as Tobey continues to step forward, balancing public life with personal authenticity, the world witnesses a legacy that transcends Spider-Man, transcends Hollywood, and resonates in the quiet corners of human experience. The man who once swung through city skylines now navigates the most challenging journey of all, the journey of self, family, and enduring impact. In this final chapter, Tobey Maguire's story completes an arc not of unbroken triumph, but of human truth, vulnerability, struggle, reflection, and intentional living. It is a legacy that will inspire, educate, and resonate far beyond the silver screen. The world remembers Spider-Man. Those who truly understand remember Tobey Maguire, the actor, the father, the husband, the man who survived silence and returned with quiet strength. And in that remembrance lies the essence of his legacy: resilience, authenticity, and the enduring proof that a life lived fully, with courage and integrity, leaves an impact no fame or fortune can replicate. Tobey Maguire's story is not over, but the legacy he has built, quietly and deliberately, will endure for generations to come.